Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 2, episode 1. The stories in this episode are The Once and Future King and A Saucer of Loneliness. So, spoilers for the episode as always. This is a Patreon sponsored review. Thank you very much to Cindy for picking the show. So yeah, we're back to 80s Twilight Zone. It's been a little while after the Dexter off-ramp. We're back on and kind of a middling episode overall to kind of come back into it, in all honesty. I think there's some fun ideas or good elements to both stories, but I don't think the execution in either of them is particularly exciting or captivating. The first story, Once and Future King, revolves around Elvis, or more specifically, a young Elvis impersonator who is frustrated about the bookings that he's getting as an Elvis impersonator, but then Twilight Zone shenanigans happens when he has a car accident, and he seemingly transports back in time to the 50s and meets a young Elvis right before he starts becoming famous, right before he hits his big break. And that's the basic premise. I'll get into more of it obviously as I go, but the big thing with this one is that immediately they say, oh, you could be Elvis's brother, and this impersonator, I think his name's Gary, points out that, well, that's a bad omen because Elvis's brother died at birth, which is a fact that I happen to know for whatever reason. I believe I learned that in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, from Perry White on that show, who liked to bring up Elvis facts. But that turned out to be foreshadowing in a couple of different ways. One, because when he does go back in time and meets Elvis, other characters start pointing out, oh, is that your brother? Because he looks so much alike. And it's the same actor playing both roles, at least unless my eyes were deceiving me. I'm pretty sure it was the same actor. And you've got the Elvis side of him, of course, doing the impression, talking like Elvis, or at least how you vaguely think Elvis talks. And you effectively have this kind of what starts to feel like a bit of a time, not a time loop, but like a paradox starting to form, in that Elvis is feeling nervous about even continuing with his music, and Gary is going to be this inspirational figure who's like, no, you have to do your music, it's important. You're going to be the king, you're going to be the king of rock and roll. And Elvis has no idea what rock and roll is yet, because he's not quite invented it or whatever. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of the snake eating the tail kind of thing as far as like how Elvis is going to become who he is. And it's the idea that maybe this Gary is going to influence him. But then there's the twist, I guess we'll call it, where Elvis doesn't like the music that Gary's playing for him, which are literally just Elvis songs. He says, I can't play these things. And they end up having a fight. Elvis starts kind of like pushing him and wanting to leave, and Gary tries to stop him, and it ends up in a bit of a shoving match. And Elvis just lands poorly, right? He lands in such a way that he dies. And Gary's obviously distraught. He did not mean to kill Elvis. Obviously, he loves Elvis. But that's where it clicks into place what this story actually is and what it's going to do. It's saying that Gary's going to just take over for Elvis and live out the rest of his life as the rest of Elvis's life and his career. He starts doing the voice after he buries Elvis somewhere. He's going to just assume his life and no one will be the wiser, and he can just go and fulfill all the things he wanted to do, which obviously fulfills everything that he was frustrated by in the future, because he wanted to be taken seriously, he wanted the fame and the success Elvis had, he wanted to be a musician that matters, and now in a weird way he gets to do that. So the interesting Twilight Zone element to this, to me, is this idea of, well, was this always going to happen, right? Was it ever really a man named Elvis, or was it always Gary who went back in time? Has he always been basing, if this has happened every single time he gets to that part of the time loop, right? And he goes back in time and takes over for the man called Elvis. What if he always did that? What if it was always going to be Gary going back in time? This predestination idea that he was always going to live out that life. And it's just this weird thing where he's influenced by himself before he knows it was himself. And it's something he even questions a little bit, because the final kind of loop around at the end of the episode is we cut ahead to near the end of his career, where he's got the bigger hair and the sideburns and he's wearing the white suit, he's in Vegas. Because his manager, Gary's manager, who was trying to give him this gig in Vegas at the start of the episode, revealed that she once spoke to Elvis, that Elvis asked for a private chat with her in his hotel room, and he gave her a white scarf and whatever, but he just talked a lot. And the reveal here at the end of the story is that he's talking to 18-year-old her, and it never quite necessarily completely felt like she understood what he was saying, because he's basically admitting that he stole this guy's life and saying everything that's went on. I don't know if it's actually trying to say that the manager in the later part of the story, or the start of the story, but later on in her life, knew that she was sending this guy Gary back in time by sending him on this job. I don't know if it's trying to necessarily say that. It doesn't. But at the same time, meeting Elvis feels like a pretty big memory for her, so you think she'd remember what Elvis said to her, unless she was just so starstruck that she didn't take it in. I guess the elephant in the room that I have to address here about this story is that I really like Bubba Hotep. And Bubba Hotep's whole thing is that Elvis switched place with an impersonator. Now, he didn't die in Bubba Hotep. He went on to just live the life of this normal guy who was an impersonator. And this other guy took over Elvis's life, and it was him that actually died when we all think Elvis died. This isn't the exact same plot by any means, but it was hard not to think about that a little bit as I was watching this, especially once Elvis snuffed it, and then it was about this guy assuming the role of Elvis. Unfortunately, he didn't have to fight off a mummy at an old folks' home like Bubba Hotep, which is a great little B movie. I highly recommend it. Bruce Campbell plays Elvis, and it is delightful. So, anyway, I think the episode, or this story, is all right. It's not bad. Like, I think the things that it gets into are fun enough from a sci-fi perspective. There's kind of a predestination element to it. I almost wish it kind of maybe went a bit heavier on him questioning, wait, was I always going to do this? Was I always Elvis to begin with? I really think that was the interesting question that he just kind of ponders a little bit when he's older, when he's talking to the young manager. And that was kind of the most intriguing part of it to me. All of the, playing off himself as playing both Elvis and Gary at the same time was just kind of alright. It was a bit gimmicky. It didn't really feel like... It was kind of this weird disconnect where they keep saying he looks just like Elvis, and they're saying that before we meet Elvis in the show, and I'm like, I don't think he looks that much like Elvis. But then we obviously meet Elvis and he's played by the same actor, and I'm like, okay, I guess in this universe that the show takes place in, he does look exactly like Elvis because he's playing both roles. But because we don't see like Elvis, like even a photograph of Elvis that we focus on early on to sort of show what Elvis is supposed to look like here, as opposed to what the real world Elvis looks like, there was a little bit of a disconnect when they kept saying that until you see what Elvis looks like here. And there's some, fish out of water time stuff, not a ton of it, but just a little thing here or there. He's wearing a shirt with a black musician on it, and someone points that out in a somewhat racist manner. And he realizes, oh shit, I'm in a different time period here. Which, it's obviously something they've just put in to point out that he is in a different time period, and he has to realize, oh, I'm actually in the 50s, which he's already kind of realized because of the newspaper. But he's basically learning a simple time travel lesson of like, watching what he says and does, because certain things aren't going to be taken the same way, or what he's wearing in this case. But again, it was almost making me think of more interesting storytelling potential ideas of like, obviously he gets to live out his dream of being Elvis, I guess, but it would almost be nice if he was a little conflicted about the fact that he had to live in a time period that wasn't his own. I guess it's just saying there's nothing for him in his time period because he was unhappy, and this is like the best thing he can do. Or maybe even emphasize the idea that, he's doing this because he feels like he's got a duty to do it, to make sure Elvis's legacy is still intact. Which he kind of does say actually as he's he's digging the grave and he's doing all that stuff. But it never, like, I feel like there's just a couple of different things they could have like honed in on a little bit more to make it a little bit more interesting. And the main one that I keep coming back to is this idea that he was always going to be Elvis, and that Elvis was always him, really. Like, he wasn't born Elvis Presley, but he was always going to take this name from this other person that he assumed was going to go on to be the Elvis Presley that he knows, but he doesn't. And I think the hint is there that Elvis is like, I can't play this music, I don't know how to do this. I think that is your big hint that that's really what's going on. And I don't know, there's maybe something to be said there for that. But I mean, there's some other things, like I say, like dealing with the time period a little bit more. Does he struggle to fit into that? It kind of feels a little bit like, well, none of the differences in the time period affect him because he's a white guy, so it doesn't really matter. He's not going to care. Which is just kind of something that maybe isn't thought about as much in older time travel stories that I always think about now, but certainly it did cross my mind. And he seems pretty chill. As soon as like this, recording studio guy's like, hey, whatever you're doing there, Elvis, it sounds great. Keep playing that. He just gets a big grin on his face, and that's him happy. He's in his element. He gets to live his dream, and he goes on from there. I will say there was a little moment of confusion, which I thought was going to be a thing that mattered, and it never did. So it just kind of feels like a confusing moment in hindsight. And that's the moment he actually has the car accident, which sends him back in time, is that it doesn't look like he's the one that crashes or the one that flips upside down. Basically, he's driving along the road, and there's this other car that's losing control, and it looks like the other car's the one that flips. But then when it cuts to the daytime, he's the one crawling out of the car. So I don't know if it's suggesting that he is like transported over to this car, some sort of cosmic thing happened, but it was a little bit. I actually went back like 30 seconds to watch it again to see if I misunderstood, and it looked the exact same to me the second time. So it feels like a bit of a weirdness in the filmmaking, or they're trying to imply some weird, like, I don't know, this other car was mystical and did something as it went past them, or something. I don't know. They do a lot of like imagery through the rear view mirror, where they've got the camera on the mirror. And I guess, that's looking back, so we're sort of maybe foreshadowing going back in time a little bit because we're looking back the way kind of thing. So I can understand that a little bit thematically, but it felt a little bit weird to me in that sense. So that was the first story. Not terrible, not bad, all right. A couple of nice ideas, but could have went a bit further with it to really feel like something. Maybe if I was a big Elvis fan, it would have hit even, hard, but I'm not. Like I'm familiar with Elvis, but that's about it. Bubba Hotep is the height of my Elvis fandom. So the second story is called A Saucer of Loneliness, and this stars Shelley Duvall, who most people probably know from The Shining, but she's obviously been in other things as well, particularly in the 70s and 80s. And this is about a waitress who's very lonely, lives with her older mother, and she's like feeling sad when she sees her like colleagues be picked up by their boyfriends and they're going on fancy dates, and she just feels very lonely about the whole thing. But the inciting incident of the story is that this weird gold flying saucer comes down in broad daylight, and everyone can see it. It's not just like a thing that she sees and no one else sees. In fact, that's an important part of the story, that everyone else sees that this thing is here, because they all become obsessed with asking her what it says to her, because it comes up to her. She runs away a little bit, but it comes up to her, and we don't hear anything. It's more like a psychic kind of thing, where it says something to her into her mind. And she says, "Oh, did you not hear it? Did you not hear it speak?" And she's in hospital for a day where they're grilling her, asking her questions. The TV want to know what it said. Reporters want to ask her, what did it say to you? There's even like a suggestion, like her mother gets really upset at her because apparently the neighbors think she's a spy because she won't tell everyone. Or you're a traitor. You're working with aliens because you won't tell everyone what the UFO said to you. So her mum kicks her out and she has to go get a place. And all of this is playing, and it's all very much playing on her isolation. So even after this, she's still very lonely, very isolated. But a guy asks her out. Some man asks her out at the diner that she works in, and she goes on the date. It's going well. She's saying how much she's happy to be there. He's being kind of nice, but then he pivots the conversation and just because he says, "Oh, you've been going through a lot lately. Oh, you've been hounded by all these reporters." He's being sympathetic, but then he just kind of slips in. So go on then, what did it say? Go on, tell me. And she gets uncomfortable immediately and leaves. After he repeats it a couple times, and she realizes that's all he really wants. So that's all he's there for. He's there for that one thing. Maybe that's an analogy for guys just wanting sex. I don't know, but like she realizes this is all he's there for, and she goes off away from the date. And we also see either before or after this that she's putting in she's putting messages in bottles that she's releasing into the water and the ocean. And that thematically comes back around because after all this goes down and she's feeling really sad, she actually goes out to the ocean to walk into the water to end her life. She's going to die. and a stranger comes out and like sort of fights her back in. Like she tries to kick him away, but he's like, no, I'm not letting you do this, and pulls her back to the beach. And it turns out that this guy actually, he brings up, I know who you are, I've seen you on TV or whatever, or I saw you on the beach before when the UFO came, and she's like, I bet you want to know what it said too, right? And she's feeling down, and he's like, I already know what it said. And he says this big speech about loneliness, and how you're still important, and he's like, well, that's what was in one of your bottles. Basically, he got one of her bottles, and she reveals that the UFO, it was just a message in a bottle from someone who was lonely somewhere else, and it went out so far, and it was meant to be a message to pick someone else up who was feeling lonely. But the actual message that she got wasn't what was in the bottle exactly. Like, she put it into her own words, she did her own thing with it. And the episode ends with her saying, here, I'll show you what it really said to me. And she holds out her hands, and this glowing orange orb, the same color as the UFO, starts to glow. And they both kind of like, look at it for a bit, and then they walk off on the beach, and he's got his arm around her. He also calls her beautiful at one point, maybe suggesting that there'll be a romance blossoming here. Do you know what I think's so sad about this story? Is that I think there's something really nice about this idea of there being like a message from like an alien world, and it's just a message from someone who's lonely, right? And that someone on Earth finds this and finds some kind of comfort in it, finds some kind of like, I don't know, like there's something there to that, right? And even the idea that she's this depressed, like I think fits for the story. I just don't think the actual events of the story and how they show her being lonely is all that interesting. Like, the whole like how her mother's yelling at her and telling her to get out, and it's pathetic, and it's it's unbecoming that you're still not married. All of that stuff just feels very cliched, old fashioned. I think if you did something a bit more grounded, and maybe you need more time for it. This episode divvies the time up a little bit more in favor of the first story. I mean, this isn't a super short story, like but it's not quite half either. It's like 18 minutes or something like that, and it feels like if they'd just done something that was a little bit more grounded in the character work, I think the idea of what the UFO was and what the message was might have hit really hard. But I think the way it comes up, it feels like we only get introduced to her putting messages in a bottle out like a scene or two before we get the ending. And I like the idea of a stranger coming up and helping, and the idea that he is nice in all the right ways that she wants to share what the message was because he's not looking for it. I think that's nice. Or even the idea that, him finding this message that she put out did make him feel better, that it did give him something, and it succeeded in the same way that the message from the UFO was supposed to succeed for her. Like, I think those ideas are all good. It's just that it feels kind of rushed in places, cheesy in places, and cliched. And I think the message that she put in her bottle was just a little bit too, I don't know, well, a little bit. I mean, it's basically a poem, right? It's a little bit too indirect, I think, to give it the impact in the moment it really needed to work. Like, again, this one leaves me kind of frustrated because I kind of feel like, as much as I'm not in love with the first story, I think it's kind of a perfectly pleasant version of what it's trying to be, even if it's got potential to be more than that. I think this one also has a lot of potential, but it just kind of falls short in almost every respect, other than the raw concept of what it is. And it's kind of a shame. But it's a little bit frustrating because I think you're going through like the scene where the guys asked her out and they're at the restaurant, and you kind of know it's going to take a turn. You expect them to have ulterior motives or have an agenda of some kind. And I don't think anything interesting happened in the way it came up. He just kind of pivots to it, and I'm like, I feel like, again, there was perhaps more of a story here to sort of build up to this. It may just be the sort of thing where, like, you could do, I wouldn't necessarily say a whole movie out of this premise to build up to the ending, but I can almost see the indie sci-fi drama that sort of revolves around this idea. But certainly a full 40-minute episode, as crazy as that might sound when I say I didn't really like a lot of this, I think if you had time to flesh out the character a bit more and not have everything be as cliched, I think it might have actually hit a little bit. And maybe set up the idea early on that she's sending out messages so that by the time it comes back around, it doesn't just feel like, oh, you just introduced that. That would be nice too. So, yeah, bit of a mixed bag, this pair of stories. First one's better than the second one, even though I think the potential in the second one is arguably higher. But it doesn't, given that this woman is so depressed, she tries to walk into the ocean and needs to be saved. Like that should be a big emotional feeling for the audience. That should feel like the stakes are super high because in this personal sort of dramatic story, and it just kind of made me feel a little bit like shrug. I don't know, it wasn't quite landing, and I'm just trying to diagnose why it wasn't quite landing, and I think those are the reasons that I've come up with. But hey, it is what it is. It's nice to be back doing Twilight Zone though. Hopefully we get some bangers this season, which is a short season actually. It's only like 9 episodes or something like that. Let me go back and I'll have a look, see how many episodes there are this season, but it's not a ton. Oh, it's 11 episodes apparently. Okay, well, hey, we'll see how these pan out. I mean, season 1 had a couple of, there was a lot of stuff in the middle, but there was like a good handful of like great stories in season 1. So we have a lot less potential in terms of time here, like to find the great story, because it's only 11 episodes versus like 25 or whatever it was. But hopefully we can find some gems in here and be happy with them. But yeah, so we'll see what the next episode's like next time. But let me know what you thought of this episode of Twilight Zone in the comments below if you've seen it. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff, and of course you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep everything coming, or via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. But thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.